to
I
you
had it someplace.
last Friday.
And I made a hard copy for you.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
How is everyone? It's good to see you again. It's been a little while. Let's see. Last time I was here, was it December? Yeah, because you were putting the Christmas tree up. It was a beautiful tree, too. I used to do that, leave the tree up until, because it became an ornament in the house and it looked so pretty. You know? But we're here to present you with the report of recommendations from all of the work that we did over those 3 months. Looking at the organization to identify ways to make it more effective, efficient, and run more smoothly, and ultimately to serve the citizens of Jacksonville. We have done a lot of analysis. We appreciate all of the work that you guys did and your staffs. We interviewed every single one of the staff people that were here at the time, and we got a lot of cooperation and a lot of information. We tried to analyze that and compile it in this report. We also sent a PDF file. Did all of you get a copy of the PDF file on the report? Okay. I know it's long, but it's necessary. So, and the next slide. What I'd like to do is to go through the report and just identify how we did it, what did we do, identify the methodology to remind you of the work. We're going to talk about the culture, the strategy, and the performance of the organization. We're going to go through the organization realignment recommendations, and I'd like to have some feedback and some discussion with regard to the recommendations, okay? Because they're not static. I mean, they're best practices. There are different ways of organizing. There are different ways of looking at business process, and there are some suggestions there that you might find exciting and ready to do, and there are some suggestions there that you might say. So we'll talk about those too, right? And then we're going to talk about implementation issues, because one of the things that we discussed when we first came in was the different initiatives that had taken place over the years, where implementation may have been a little less than desired. So I wanted to make sure that we talked very pointedly about implementation and how that might take place. So what we wanted to do, we started out identifying the objectives and criteria. We interviewed Terrence and Elaine and said, okay, well, what are your objectives? What are your goals for realignment? We did some data gathering with regard to the climate and culture. We looked at the strategic plan of the organization, and we analyzed your core business processes, which is why we have all of these great process maps, and looked at your organization structure. Organization realignment involves all of these things. It starts with the strategy of the organization. So I'm going to ask us to have kind of more of a conversation than a presentation or just a talking head. So when you think about strategy, what comes to mind for you in this organization?
Strategic plan.
Strategic plan. And strategic plan, are you talking about the consolidated, that part of the consolidated plan that is the strategic plan?
It could be a portion of that.
Okay, a portion of that. Okay, what else? LaCree, what do you think about when we talk about strategic strategy? What comes to mind when you hear that word, that term, strategy?
Well, I think that when we start talking about strategies, we probably need to have, more collective conversation when we have strategies. Because look, like we have our strategies up here, our planning up here, they never really seem to get down to, you know, the people actually doing the work. And because, when we develop those strategies, they're not really involved, they haven't really bought into it, and everybody still kind of has their own separate ideas of the way things should go, but everybody's not working together towards the same strategy. So I have this thing that, I say that I think that everybody should be equally happy or equally unhappy. You know, that's kind of how I manage,
Okay.
because I try to be fair. So that's
Okay.
good.
Strategy is very important in an organization because basically it identifies your reason for being. Why are you here? Why does the organization exist? And how is it going to carry out the goals and objectives that you exist to carry out, right? And so out of strategies comes, okay, well, what kind of systems do we need in order to get to the goal, right? What kind of staff do we need? What kinds of organizational structure? What kinds of skills? Right? And all of that points back to strategy. All of that, the systems, the staff, the structure, the skills should emanate from and be designed to carry out the strategy of the organization. The only reason that you exist is for a specific strategy, right? And that is all tied together by shared values, or should be tied together by shared values. Okay, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So, our organization realignment objectives. Did it again? What we came up with when we talked with Elaine and Terrence, one of the things that they wanted to do was to improve the workload capacity. See some nodding of the heads. Improve coordination in the organization, improve outcome management, standardize procedures so that, you know, people aren't working at cross ends and that everything is, everyone knows what the procedure is and there's a standard for it. Reduce any duplication that exists in the organization or the processes, and to improve accountability. How are we doing? How do we measure whether or not we are being successful in carrying out the strategy? Okay, next slide. One of the things that I started with in looking at the organization was the organization culture. Culture is an interesting thing. It's like air. Air is all around us. We don't see it. We don't think about it. But it's absolutely vital. You will know if there's no more air, right? You will know pretty quickly. But culture in organization is amplified by the behavior of the leaders. Leaders in organizations make the culture of the organization what it is. People emulate the leadership of an organization. And so that's one of the reasons why culture is so important. It's evident in the behaviors of individuals and groups and in the different divisions. It is visible in the way work gets done on a day-to-day basis. So in a lot of organizations, especially community development organizations, for example, there's crisis management that goes on. And it becomes a norm. It becomes, okay, we all know that come budget time, we're going to go into crunch mode or crisis mode, or when 1.5 comes around, or when NSP, deadlines come around, we all know that we're going to go into crisis management. And it becomes an expectation. That's part of culture, because it doesn't have to be a crisis. But because we believe that it's going to be a crisis, then we carry out that belief, right? Organization culture is seen in the shared beliefs and values and assumptions that are held by the people in the organization. So just like we believe that there's always going to be a crisis and we can just, set our clocks to it. If we share that belief and that value and that assumption, then that is exactly what's going to happen. It's embedded in a network of organizational practices. So we know that at a certain time of year, the consolidated plan comes along, and all of a sudden we have to switch resources. Some things don't get done, right? So those become the organization's practices. Culture is like an iceberg. If you think about the Titanic, they saw the top of the iceberg, but underneath the surface, there's this huge piece of ice that extends out far beyond what you can actually see. The reason that culture is like an iceberg is because the things that you see at the top are the goals, the technology, the policies and procedures, the financial resources that we use in order to carry out the strategy. But the big thing underneath that are the beliefs, the assumptions, the informal way of working. So you can think about the top as the way we say things get done. And at the bottom, that big iceberg is the way that things actually get done. Right? So there's a public face, and then there's what really happens. That's why you have to take a good look at the organization's culture to identify what those things are underneath the surface, so that you can work on them. If you don't work on them, then by default, you're floating with the tide or with the current, right? That's right. This is why culture matters. The assumptions and behavior of the people of the organization, regardless of the systems, the technology, the policies and procedures, and all of that, will determine what the results will be. Because it determines how you use your technology. It determines what technology you will embrace in the organization. It will determine how change takes place in the organization. That's why culture is very important. Before you go, I have a little, okay, let's go to that. So we looked at communication. We talked about coordination and flexibility when we were doing interviews in the organization. We looked at empowerment and involvement, appreciation, and recognition, learning and development, and leadership. We did a lot of interviews, and we came up with some results that we're going to show you in just a few minutes. Go next. So the reason I asked you about the strategic plan in the consolidated plan. The strategic plan that's embedded in the consolidated plan is the strategic plan for the community. It's not focused on the organization itself. It's not focused on how the organization's systems, procedures, structure, staff skills are designed in order to carry out the consolidated plan. None of the strategic plans, none of them that I have seen, that are part of the consolidated plan from many communities across the country look at those aspects. They look at income levels, poverty, needs in the community, and how we're going to address those needs based on how we're going to use our CDBG dollars, our home dollars, our NSP dollars, etc. But they don't go to the level of how are we going to structure this organization? What systems are we going to use in order to carry out the CDBG plan? What systems are we going to use to carry out the home plan? What policies and procedures need to be in place? And that's the kind of strategic plan that needs to be developed in every community development organization across the country. We We also looked at the business process analysis, what tasks are used to administer. We looked at job functions, and again, I said that we interviewed all of the people in the organization and looked at cycle times based on some of the spreadsheets that we got back. Okay. The organizational structure provides the guidance that the organization needs in order to carry out its strategy. And we're going to talk a lot about organizational structure. Okay, Nick? Okay. So here is the analysis of the culture. Well, part of the analysis of the culture at HCD. Remember we asked the question, in order to be effective as an organization, what should HCDD start doing, stop doing, and continue doing? People said by the greatest priority or need in this organization is communicating for understanding. That's what the staff said overall, communicating for understanding. The next area was planning well in advance, was the second priority. And the third priority, lo and behold, implementing changes. Right? There were others, providing effective training, taking ownership and responsibility for processes, etc. Go to the next slide. What did we ask? What housing and community development should stop doing? By a huge margin, people said, well, 24% said we should stop working in silos. We should stop ineffectively communicating, pointing fingers and blame, and being stuck in reactive mode. A lot of that has to do with the organization's culture, the way it's structured, the way you communicate, and we have some recommendations for redesigning the organization so those are no longer as big an issue as they are or as they were in October. Do you think there's still issues in the same way that they were in October? I see someone said, someone's saying this. Yes, okay. So the next one is continue doing. You said by 31% you should continue providing good customer service. And I was thinking when I was doing this analysis, how do you know you're providing good customer service? What do you use to determine that you're providing good customer service? That's not a rhetorical.
The absence of complaints.
Okay.
Their evaluations.
What kind of evaluations?
There's evaluations like in the form of
Customer service?
service, yeah.
Okay. And how much attention is provided, or do you do analysis of those surveys on a periodic basis and then zero in on what issues customers are coming up with? Do trend analysis on those?
It's not being done across the board.
Okay.
So there's
In some areas it's being done, in some areas not so much.
Right, if it's being done on data, and it's probably a homeowner or something, you're surveying the homeowner after they get their rehab, or you're doing something else.
Yes, it's a homeowner and the lender and the contractor.
Right, related to that program, but it's not like across the board on all the programs or all the services that we provide, but we're gathering that data to see, or, analyzing that data to see if we really are providing the customer service.
Right.
Across the board.
So therefore you're gathering data in some places, but in other places not so much. So what are the different types of customers that you have? Homeowners is one. What are the other customers of this organization?
Recipients.
Some recipients, and they're individuals that they assist through our programs.
So some recipients are the ones that interact directly with you as a customer, correct? So it would be interesting to see what kind of survey data would come back from that analysis, right? What other customers do you have?
Their customers, who they serve.
Okay, some recipients, customers, any others? Developers.
Right, anybody on the outside, so it could be city council members, it could be administration, it could be title agencies, it could be lenders, you know.
Yeah, and I will bet if you got customer data from that universe, it would tell you a lot about the functioning of the organization, right? And if you analyze that data, you'll be able to target or look at and focus what areas are running smoothly, what areas are running great, what areas need some improvement, and what areas really need to be focused on in a consistent and focused manner. But that was the big aha for me when I looked at customer service and said, okay, well, how are we analyzing whether or not customer service is good? Okay. Next. So I know you probably can't see that, but this is your existing organization structure. Remember you talked about working in silos. Here are the silos, right? We've got housing in a silo. We've got community development in a silo. Then we have affordable housing and planning, or neighborhoods, right, in a section. And we have finance in a silo. The thing about that is all of these things are connected. They're part of a network and a system that has to be coordinated or should be coordinated so that the whole thing runs smoothly and that the organization is able to produce what it is designed to produce. Let's go to the next slide. So we took some time to analyze your business processes, and we were fortunate to get a spreadsheet of from I think it was UTIP and LRP, where they actually identify what date a task was completed along the project life cycle. And we had that information back to 1995, which I thought was absolutely fantastic to have that kind of data. So we did some cycle time analysis, and we looked at the number of days to complete inspections, the number of days to complete the project as a whole, the number of days under contract, meaning under contract with a specific construction contractor, the distribution of contract costs, which gives you some idea of, you look at that with relationship to how long it takes to complete a project, because obviously a more costly project is going to take longer than one that, you know, is $10,000 or $15,000, right? The number of days application received to application request. Now, this is just one snapshot of one piece of data in the organization, and we're fortunate to be able to get this information because it was already a spreadsheet. I'm not sure, I've tried to get spreadsheets from other functions, and I'm not sure that there's a consistent way of looking at where you are in the process from a process standpoint. So in other words, if how long does it, when has one function finished with the contract, and when does the next function start with it? When was the payment submitted? When was the payment paid? What were the time frames in between in the process? That data, that information is critical. It's the lifeblood of the organization, because you really can't begin to improve unless you set a baseline and understand where you are on a day-to-day basis. We'll go to the next slide. So, we looked at days to complete inspection. So what this says is, on average, to get a housing inspection, it takes 62 days. This is across the time period from 1995 to 2011 where the data was collected. So from the time that an application is approved and a person is determined to be eligible to the time that an inspector actually gets out there to make the inspection, the average is 62 days. And that's not, I'm not making any judgments about whether that's too long or too short. That's one of the things that you have to do. But the issue is this standard deviation. Goes all the way up to 450 days. 450 days to get the inspection. That's why you need to be collecting information on your processes on a day-to-day basis, because then you can drill down into that 450 days or that 330 days and identify, well, what's the holdup? What is the problem? Is it that we can't get in touch with the homeowner? Which could be, right? Well, if that's the case, what processes are in place? What procedures or policies do you have in place that say to the homeowner, you have to respond within a certain period of time, or you know, if it gets to 30 days and you run a report and you see that, you know, you're moving beyond your set limit of 30 days, then you can go in and say, okay, well, this one's been out there for 30 days, why is it? Right? Go to the next slide. Similarly, days to complete a project. So this is the frequency of projects completed between 95 and 2012. There were 1,086 of them. And to complete projects, we have one out here at more than 480 days. That's pretty much more than a year. Was it a year and a couple months? So, but this is the normal curve right here. So you have, your average is 149 days. Most of your projects are here. If you set a limit that says no project should go more than 150 days, then all of this is outside of your limit. And so therefore, if you're tracking this on a weekly, monthly basis, when it gets to 150 days, somebody's throwing up a flag and saying, whoa, this is 150 days, we need to figure out what's wrong with this particular project. Right? That's process analysis. Go to the next slide. How many days under contract? Again, that's the contract between the contractor and the homeowner. Out there, 450 days. More than a year. Again, this is from 1995 to 2011, so some of those might be older projects, but still, it's giving you a picture. Okay? Next slide. The distribution of contract cost. So most of your average was 24,211, including change orders. Do you have a maximum for LRP?
Depends on funding source.
Okay, okay. So if you had let's just say it's home or CDBG, you would have a specific cutoff point with regard to dollar value. So you wouldn't be going up into the 130,000, 135,000, etc. And if you're getting change orders that bump it up over 10%, then you should be looking at it really hard, right?
Most definitely, and I think that's what we're seeing here are some anomalies that occurred over the years. Some projects that I'm thinking of one in particular that we were requested by HUD to go back and we put in better part of close to 200,000 in that particular project. So, but definitely, I really do enjoy this analysis in reference to that, and we also are able to see, especially with the changing of the funding sources and what we're utilizing within our program, how that change has changed over time.
Okay. But the point of this is that if you have set limits, and you have good systems to collect data on an ongoing basis, then you're much less likely to have that
Gap.
elongated
Yeah,
standard
definitely.
deviation.
Definitely.
I'm not sure that all of the functions are collecting data in that way,
Yeah.
but definitely should be. I mean, because otherwise, you can't control it. You don't know what's going on until you get out to 480 days and somebody, some customer somewhere is saying, what's going on, right?
Definitely.
Next slide. This one was also very, very interesting. Again, this is the frequency of days from the point that an application is received to the point that an inspection is requested. So essentially, this is the eligibility period, right? This is where we're contacting the homeowner, we're gathering data about, what your income is, etc. The furthest point out there is 420 days. That's a long time. Now, that's an anomaly, but it's data that should be looked at.
Definitely. Charles, can I speak to that also? And that was something that was very interesting, because I saw this data prior to you putting it here. Saw this data also, and that definitely, so we had to put in processes and some controls within our PPM that stated, for clarity to our internal customer and our internal staff and external customer of the length of time that we would utilize to remedy any challenges.
Right.
Because it becomes, once you get past a certain amount of time, if the eligibility is just not there, it's just not there. And we need to move on to the next person
Right.
who's been waiting and has all their things in process. So that was one of the analysis that I appreciated.
And so what's the impact of that if other processes are not controlled or limited in that way? Then the thing that happens is you're spending staff time,
Definitely.
you're spending goodwill of the customer, you're spending resources that can be utilized in other ways, so that you can plan it out so that you never have a 1.5 issue. You never have a commitment or spending issue because you have put your program into process limits. So therefore, you will increase the number that you're able to do, and you decrease the time frame in which you're able to do it. Right? Okay. Next slide. Okay. So let's talk about the suggested organization structure. So all of you have a copy of this, maybe. This is some of us, like me, are vision challenged. Okay. Here is one way of looking at an organization structure and a process. In this scenario, I put in your report some pros and cons of different organizational structures, okay? And what I'm recommending is an organizational structure that is a hybrid between team-based, process, and function. And when I looked at the data, it became clear that while CDBG and Home and some of the other funding sources are different with regard to regulation, different sometimes in regard to the processes that have to take place, when you really boil it down, the organization does what? It determines eligibility, whether it's a CDBG public facility or it's a homeowner. You have to determine whether or not it's eligible. Once you determine whether or not it's eligible and they have passed certain requirements, then you go on to contract management, where you negotiate and close on a contract, whether that contract is for homeowner rehabilitation or that contract is with the subrecipient, right? You then do some sort of project management that involves either construction management, it involves either compliance and monitoring, or managing the facility development. For long-term projects like home and some others, you have compliance and monitoring that has to go on over an extended period of time, and then you have your finance and accounting function. So so instead of organizing by CDBG and home and ESG and HOPWA, you can leverage the resources that you have by organizing in terms of eligibility, contracts management, project management, and compliance and monitoring. And then in order to ensure that you have coordination across those functions, you develop teams of people. So I've demonstrated this by saying, okay, we have a red team, a blue team, and a green team. On each team, there are people who have expertise in eligibility, in contracts, in project management, and in compliance and monitoring on each team. So you have, 3 teams, but you have expertise across the organization in each one of those teams, okay? So for example, if, so all RFPs, NOFAs, grant applications, and those kinds of things would be scored by the eligibility unit, regardless of whether it's a home or a CDBG or ESG or what have you. The expertise for all of those functions would reside in the eligibility unit. Once they're deemed eligible, they would be passed on to the contracts unit, where there are people who have specialization in all of the different types of contracts that the organization manages. So whether it's public services, or whether it's a construction or a development contract, you have someone on that team who can handle those kinds of contracts. Passed on to the project manager. Yes.
I'm sorry, Charles. May I have a question? When we're talking about the contracts manager section, are we talking about the creation of and getting that and also having the post-award meeting with it, and the pre-construction meetings, the contract meetings, all of that?
You could separate that from contracts. I mean, and this is just in terms of discussion.
Right.
So you could have the contract from cradle to grave in terms of developing the contract to closing the contract. We've signed the contract. You could have project management pick it up at that point and do your pre-construction meeting, and all of those
Post-award meetings and everything else.
post-award meetings, etc., so that the person who is actually going to manage that project is initiating the start of that project.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I was just looking for the link.
Yes. Well,
I see how the different teams are set up as far as the groups, and I understand the red and blue and green, but I'm having a hard time figuring out how they're interacting with each other, just on a basis.
in terms of eligibility contracts and
Yeah, the eligibility functions, I see it has, people from red, blue, and green team. Is there is it a situation where perhaps a special project or something would come through? Would it be assigned to a color team or the groups? I'm just having a hard time
this is a normal process. A special project, you have to determine how that was going to be set up.
Okay.
Now, so a special project, though, really is going to take on all of these attributes,
All
right?
these different,
Right, so what makes a special project special?
Well, we hope we don't have any special ones if we plan well. It's on
Right,
the
so
sheet.
I mean, I'm trying to determine,
No.
what is it?
I'm
Maybe the
just trying to
timing.
see the relation.
I think she might be talking about the timing,
Okay.
because we have a regular cycle
Mhm.
annually that we go through, but during the course of that cycle, we have things that come up, special projects, or either something that we're gonna fund out of, program income, or out of reprogrammed funds, and the timing and the cycle for that is not established. We don't have an established cycle, which we need to establish, so we can probably capture some of those special things that happen during the course of the year that are not on the regular cycle that we're in right now for preparing an action plan and reviewing applications and getting the budget ready and getting all ready for October 1.
Right.
We
So-
know that cycle, because we know when our money's coming in, but then we have stuff that comes in off-cycle and special projects that come up.
Right.
And I guess maybe a better way to ask the question is how do we determine who's on the red team and the blue team? What is being,
Well, what you wanna do is you wanna try and get, first of all,
is it
a
skill set?
baseline of skill set.
Okay, so the
For-
red team will have a specific skill set.
No, the Reds team will have all of the skill sets. There'll be
Okay.
someone on the red team
That has, okay.
that has that specific skill set
Blue team
as a
and
start.
green team skills.
Right, as a start. But it doesn't stop there, because the role of the manager over that eligibility process is training, is to ensure, is to look at how the team is from an eligibility perspective. What are all of the things that need to be taken care of across programs with regard to eligibility? And are all the teams trained in eligibility, if they're in that eligibility function? Okay? So you have someone, and the other role for the manager is collecting data and reports from the various functions to ensure that those program limits are being hit. So you have a dashboard that would tell you how long applications are out there, are there any special problems that need to be addressed, any issues that need to be elevated to the executive management team, for example. And I would recommend that these teams meet individually on a regular basis in order to look at the universe of cases that team has. For example, let's say just the red team. The red team is going to start at eligibility and go through the project management, and the red team will always be responsible for the same project. Okay? So if I'm on the red team and I'm in eligibility and I pass that off to the contracts person on the red team, we stay in contact, we stay in constant communication about what's going on that particular project. Okay? So the red team, the blue team, and the green team keep the same cases and continue in conversation and coordination as long as they have that project.
Which reminds me of my days in manufacturing, statistical process control.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly
Ding.
what it is. Statistical process control in a different way in community development. Okay? Yes?
For contract management and project management, I want to understand the difference, because to me they're kind of one and the same.
Okay, so contract management focuses specifically on getting the contract executed, essentially. And once you've determined it's eligible, how do we get the agreement finalized? And project management takes it from the finalization of the agreement to all of those activities that are involved with ensuring that the subrecipient is following the contract, ensuring that the contractor is meeting deadlines or doing Section 3 or doing whatever. So project management is focused on the project itself. Contracts management is focused on getting it from eligibility to funding, essentially, to the point where they have funds and are ready to go. Once they have funds and are ready to go, then a project manager takes over and manages the rest of it.
And I don't see that it means that the project manager in effect, isn't still managing the contract because they're gonna manage the project to the contract. So they have that skill set, they have that knowledge. They're just not the one that has responsibility to get it done, make sure the milestones and other things that are met and closed out. But that's why I think I agree that project manager is contract manager in terms of what the scope of work is in that contract. That's what they're managing. So in fact, they're managing to that contract. They're managing to make sure they follow all the federal requirements, that they get the job done to the standards, that, all those things go on. So they do have that role, but they're not as involved in the actual initiation of the contract, and perhaps the closing out of it.
Okay.
You haven't convinced her.
So tell me what are your thoughts?
Well, because I think that that's a disconnect that we already have.
Okay, explain.
Is that we have people who are in charge of putting a contract together and managing a contract, but they don't understand that in order to manage a contract, you gotta manage the project. And you manage the project from beginning to end. You track it, you keep up with it, you're responsible for it, you report out on it, you do everything that you need to do. You work on the development, you work on the management, you work on the closeout, you work on the reports, supporting the reports. The whole thing to me is all one and the same.
Okay.
So this is what I look at. And I think that when you talk about project management, people are not seeing it as a beginning to end a full concept. I'm just gonna do this, this is my part, this is all I do, this is my part, I'm gonna check my box, and I'm not gonna look at anything else, I'm not gonna worry about anything, I'm not gonna consider the whole.
I'm not gonna be accountable for
Be
anything else.
accountable. I'm looking for accountability and responsibility.
Which is why, in this model, it's a team-based structure.
Right,
So-
I get that this team's going this way and team's going this way.
Correct.
Yeah. I
Right.
think that's really
So
cool.
if I'm
I like
managing,
that.
so if I'm managing the contract and you're managing, well, maybe managing the contract is not the right thing. Maybe it's contract initiation
Yeah, a contract development.
to contract development,
Right.
perhaps, which would separate it from that management
Right.
word that might get muddled. But it's essentially it's coordinating with a project manager on that team. If I'm a project manager and I get the project, it won't be the first time that I've ever known that project was coming. There would have been discussions about it. There would have been, if there were problems with it, if there had been some anomaly or something that needed to be discussed on that project, it would have been discussed in my team meeting. I would know that it's coming to me, and I will know all about whatever issues are there once I get it to do the management. That's the linking part. So it's taking it out of the silo and making the information available for everyone in the team so that there's coordination across. Exactly. Okay. What other comments, issues? I know it's not an easy concept. So I want to hear what your thoughts are. Yes.
Just a question, I see, we have some people that are gray boxes, and I think I'm seeing that represents that they're kind of on all of the teams.
Right.
And I know specifically my area is like that. How does, with two people, how do we interact with each of the teams as they're going through this? Because that's one of the problems that we have. Everybody has their track that they're in, and ultimately it's going to converge with either me or Amy, and that's a lot of volume. How, with all these different, how do we interact then with?
So I would assume, and this isn't in cut in stone, I would assume most of your interaction would be with project management and contracts, funding and paying, right?
And monitoring.
Monitoring.
and monitoring compliance.
Mhm.
So a lot of that can be done in systems work, as opposed to trying to
Actually
be,
face-
on each team and be in each meeting. So data and information, processes and procedures
Mhm.
would be the linking element for finance.
Okay, good job.
Reporting both up to finance and down
And
from
out.
finance and out. Exactly.
Yeah, because the mortgage portfolio would be
Okay. Other questions, thoughts?
And I think that's, one of the questions are, there appears, or there are some functions that doesn't appear to be listed here, and where would we put those
Yeah,
functions?
I thought that there would be, and I wasn't sure what those functions were, so why don't you
Yeah,
tell me?
Like board activities, we've got CPAC, community-based activities, JHFA.
Yeah, the JHFA is,
Um,
I've got a huge mortgage.
What's
portfolio.
JFS?
I'm sorry.
JFS?
Housing Finance Authority, so the bond team.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, and I've got the mortgage portfolio, that's a full-time FTE right there, just managing.
But there's relatively no interaction between that and these other,
No, I think ultimately, the way
so
that I'm
it's,
seeing,
it springs off.
yeah, that some of my staff has been carved out to these functions, it would, I guess, be a monitoring and compliance
Mhm.
function,
yeah,
servicing the mortgage portfolio.
right.
Yeah, and those were not subject, because they're not one CPD program, so that's why, we didn't delve into all these other
Right,
possibilities.
no, and that's fine, I'm just trying to, in my head, figure
Right.
out.
But in the real world, we have to.
Well, you do.
Yeah, right, so we
Yeah,
have to
because
go
the
to
mortgage
market.
just got spun off of one CD.
Yeah, we gotta, add some of that stuff back in,
Sure.
because
Right.
of course, of the day-to-day,
Right.
it's a reality.
Right.
So we have to incorporate it back in.
Right, so
Yeah,
those programs, you'd have to figure out how
We
they,
have to figure out
how they
amongst
relate.
ourselves how that flow goes.
right. And if they're similar in terms of their attributes with regard to eligibility, contract management, contract initiation, project management, et cetera, then you could fold it in to the broader concept. I did put planning and reporting as its own section, because I was thinking about the fact that you have this neighborhood unit that interacts with the neighborhoods as their primary function. And I was wondering why, if that function is there, why they aren't involved more in the consolidated planning process, or in managing the consolidated planning process, having interaction with the community around that. I mean, because they have this whole network of community organizations out there that they deal with on a daily basis almost, right? So I just thought that maybe you might want to look at how to kind of spin off that function so that it's not part of your workflow on a daily basis, but at that particular time you have a unit that can function, that can look at that and handle it and shepherd it from cradle to grave, if you will.
And what about also looking at them to cross over into the other areas?
Exactly. because-
Contract management and project management,
Right.
finance and compliance.
Why? Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
Okay, because there
Back
has
to
to
you,
be,
Charles.
yeah. There has to be linkage between your plan and implementation.
Sure,
Right.
that's what I'm saying, so to have that part over here, then you're saying the process way as well.
Exactly.
Okay, but we just have this is not really showing that, or
It is in terms of, in the planning, and you'll notice that in the planning reporting section, they're on each team too.
Okay.
So when it comes to gathering data for CAPER, GPR, whatever it is, they're on the team.
Yeah, you have
They got the
QPR,
data.
you have QPR here, is that what you mean, GPR? Are you talking about other quarterly reports? Or
Other quarterly reports, yeah.
Other quarterly reports, not necessarily GPR?
Well, it could be,
Okay.
yeah. So that person on that team would be responsible for gathering that data and coalescing it, and then the planning and reporting function already, they have the data. You don't have to stop doing what you do because you've got somebody on the team whose job that is.
That kind of threads the needle towards where we're trying to go organizationally without those folk anyway, which kind of pushes them further and deeper into the program areas, because as it stands now, they are rather siloed. So I think this kind of helps move us along that line.
Right. Okay. Other questions and issues? I also gave you a sample of the task level organization for a sample new construction
Oh,
home buyer.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I have one more question.
Yes.
This looks like we have a lot more people on this chart than we have. Yeah, like we need some more bodies.
I took the number of people that you had on the existing
Uh-huh.
and made this based on the existing. Now, you may have some vacancies in the existing.
We've lost some people, but it still seems like with all the managers you're talking about and the actual staff, yeah, it looks like we're short some staff to fill these blocks.
Okay. And that's an issue, and
Like we're
that's an
trying
issue
to
now,
figure out
right?
how we want to.
I mean, that's an issue
Yeah.
today, right?
Yeah, but I mean, what I'm saying is, are your recommendations that we get more staff? Are you recommending that, you know, that's what I'm asking?
Yes.
Is that what your
Yes.
recommendation
Yes.
is? So right,
Right.
okay, because we
Yes,
big.
yes, absolutely.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. No, I was just gonna say that I did a sample process map that looks at it across, you know, all of the functions or all of the expertise says, and this would be specifically for the red team. And you can take a look at those at your leisure. Okay, so that's recommendation 1, design and implement a hybrid organization structure. That's what this thing is. Hybrid organization structure. I think that this would go a long way to making the organization more effective, given certain variables are in place. Implementation is a huge issue. Change management is a huge issue. Communication strategy is a huge issue.
Especially that.
Yes. Elaine, did you have a
I
question?
mean, well, no, I just said I especially see this model improving the communication, because you have people on each team that are cross teams, so that just by itself lends itself to better communication. Yeah.
Okay, so recommendation number 2, technology. The technology doesn't have to be, you know, this big database thing that costs hundreds and thousands of dollars to bring into the organization. We were able to do analysis on the analysis that we just did, looking at the averages and the standard deviation and all, by just taking the spreadsheets that people filled out on a daily basis back to 1995, and that gave us the information. So standardizing technology. Another good platform to use would be SharePoint, Microsoft SharePoint. You can do permissions so that only certain people can work on certain projects. You can make it so that it will automatically timestamp when a task is done or completed. You can set it up in many different ways. So it doesn't have to be a huge technology infrastructure involvement, because I know that budgets are constrained and those types of things. You just have to sit down and figure out, taking a process map, taking your policies and procedures, and identifying where are the key points that we need to have information flow up, flow down, and flow across the organization.
You had any discussions with the software that we're waiting for the vendor signature on the contract right now, the cursor control, community development manager software?
At the time that you were investigating that, we would just,
Yeah, so
Right.
I mean, we're at the point that we're ready to activate the subscription, which is going to allow us to standardize the way that we collect data and report
Across
data
programs?
across in real time.
CDBG
so.
programs, housing programs, public service, neighborhoods, all of that?
Absolutely, so I mean, well, our subscription will probably be active in the next 30 days, and so, you know, Renee and I have had a lot of conversations about how important it is, the way that you initially thoughtfully decide what data you're going to collect and how it's going to be structured so that you have, so I mean, any suggestions that you guys have as to, you know, particular metrics or anything like that. Because we're almost ready to go.
This is a great time then.
The timing is
Timing is
absolutely
great.
wonderful, and it's funny because you would think that it would be an expensive solution, but I think annually it's about $8,000, but because it's going to allow us to get rid of our current mortgaging software, because it actually does the project from application to the satisfaction of the mortgage, that's gonna save us about $2,800 a year in licensing fees on that. Really, it's about $5,000, and we've done some analysis, and it looks like it's gonna save about $100,000 a year, just from duplicated activity. So, I mean,
So great, so
hopefully,
the thing that you have to do now is to identify, like you said, Laura, what are the metrics that you need to collect, that you want to collect? What will the dashboard look like? Who will be responsible on a monthly basis or a periodic basis for looking at the data and investigating any anomalies and ensuring that you're meeting those timeframes and targets? And I would assume that if you go across from a team-based perspective, you want to look at it from a cycle time perspective, from a quality perspective, from a budget perspective, and also you want to look at it in terms of the expertise, how errors and omissions. You want to try as much as possible to make the system as foolproof as possible, so that people can't make errors in it. And if they do, identify what it is and why it's being made.
Sorry, I had to run in and out. The duplication question, discussion was kind of interesting. Where have you got, I don't know if this was a comment you brought up or something that Laura brought up in her question, but where did you guys notice the duplication? Can you give me like 5 or 6 areas that you saw duplication?
That's a question for the room?
Here's a question for the room, or you want to answer? I was really kind of referring back to your comment, Laura, when you said that there was duplication and there was an opportunity with the matrix to find savings. Did you
well,
say there was
I'm talking about data. I'm talking about duplication of people. I'm talking about very frequently we'll find that I'm collecting data in one way, McCree's collecting the same data in another way, Amy's got it in another way. It's all still the same data, but we're all spending time collecting it in a way to address whatever it is that we're trying to address. The data is not centralized, and if it were centralized, then we would be able to, if LaCree needed the data in a certain format to present to Elaine or to do an analysis, she would just be able to extract it the way that she needs it, and you have one-time data input instead of, 300 spreadsheets and, that sort of thing.
That's an absolutely crucial point.
Yeah,
One-time
we find,
data.
if there is a question, then we have to go to 2 or 3 people to gather the individual pieces of data to put them together so that we can respond appropriately to whatever the question is.
Okay, I see.
The other area of duplication, if you will, that exists now is the fact that in each of the silos, you have people who are doing contracting, people who are doing payments, people who are doing project management, etc.
We frequently find that we're working on the same thing as one of our teammates that had, collaborated either, individually or just by virtue of the raw data that perhaps one of them could serve both purposes.
So hopefully, I don't know what's the name of the software?
It's cursor control,
Cursor control.
contract development, main CDM.
Okay, hopefully it will also allow you to pull performance metrics.
It will.
Okay, good.
And that's why we just, when we launched the subscription, then, there's gonna be a lot of meetings purposes and for developing strategic goals going forward. You know,
That's
how much per unit does it cost us to do this?
Right.
And by virtue of that, does it make sense for us to do this or this?
Great. Okay, so recommendation 2, develop and implement a standard technology, which is being done. We're right on time there. Recommendation number 3, develop and implement a standard performance management system, which is your technology is gonna help you to do this. But in performance management, you have to take that data around performance and cycle times and actually manage to it. Sit down with the team. How are we doing this month with regard to getting all of the budgets compiled, or the contract signed, or the contract closed out, or whatever the issue is? That team develops a cadre of individuals who are responsible for all of the cases in that team. And all of the data that come from that team, they can sit down and they can examine it, they can look at their problems and resolve them on a periodic basis. So we're suggesting that you set your plans and their expectations, your performance management goals and limits, you monitor them, then develop an improvement plan. It's not a gotcha, it's how do we get better, right? Rate yourself periodically and then celebrate your accomplishments. You know, you need to have some rewards and celebrations in the organization around accomplishments. That's how you improve your culture. If the expectation and the beliefs and the assumptions of the organization are that I'm going to be appreciated when I put out the effort to come under these limits or perform in a certain way, then it's going to make the standards, the technology, the procedures much more easily implemented in the organization than if it's just plopped down and you say, okay, you got to do this, and if you don't, we're going to shake a finger. Yes, ma'am.
And how do we get past the barriers that are associated with that?
It's an excellent question, and we're gonna talk about that as soon as I finish with recommendations 4, 5, and 6.
I wait with bated breath.
Okay, recommendation 4, training. Different types of training are going to have to take place in the organization when you move from one structure to the other. And it probably shouldn't be, okay, today we're different, right?
Yeah, you're on the red team.
You're on the red team, go.
Go for it.
No. There's training around the organizational changes that should take place to allow people to understand, okay, there are changes coming. What's my role? How do I incorporate this into my daily work? Do I have to change? Will all of the teams be co-located geographically in the building? I don't know. There are different types, there are different ways to do that. Training with regard to expected outcomes. How will things be different? What should I be expected to do differently? Training with regard to program requirements. Because you're going to a model where expertise is driven into the teams, there needs to be a lot of training for people who have never managed a CDBG contract before. How does that happen? Checklists, forms, procedures, the software, all of that training needs to take place. Technology changes. How will the technology be rolled out? What do I need to know with regard to the technology? How will I do my job? And team dynamics. How do we work together as a team? What are our baseline values? How will we interact? How will we become a team? Because just because you put 3, 4, or 5 people together doesn't make them a team. They're just a group of folks. Right? There are team dynamics that need to be trained, that need to be practiced, that need to be monitored and instilled in the organization. So we recommend that you develop and institute a training program along all of these lines.
Is that, all, can I ask?
Yes, go ahead.
In reference to the training program, that, instituting that is not only internal training, but also external, because I think that one of the things that I appreciate is that in order to get past some of the barriers that may be there, it may be more prudent, to have an external training to look at something or either a business system, a structure, a funding source from a different, I can inflect to you what I believe and how I interpret it versus if I went to a external trainer.
I see, so you mean, when you say external training, you mean going to an off-site training
An
with?
institute
An
or
institute,
whatever.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, you can do that, yeah. There are lots of opportunities and lots of places where you can get, training on change management, for example, training on team development, HUD office training on the various programs. So scheduling that and identifying who needs to go and over what period of time, and also then after that training takes place, monitoring how people are doing
Right.
from that training so that they keep their
Part of a
skills up.
professional development.
Professional development.
And that professional development has, outcomes, and so not just plopping someone into a seat somewhere in Atlanta, but also bringing it back,
Right.
what was learned, how was it learned, how can we,
Mhm.
almost reporting back out.
And really, you could do a train the trainer. So one or two people go to Atlanta to get trained, and they go with the understanding that when they come back, they've got to train 2 or 3 people.
Exactly.
That's one of a good example of that is Renee's training on this new technology that we've been able to afford her with the expectation that she will come back and add value to the team with a train-the-trainer kind of model so that others on the team in a like position would not necessarily have to go to that training but benefit from her learning.
Exactly.
And I can't wait for you to get to the barriers part.
Okay.
Kind of-
Okay. Yes. Yes.
I recall when I was in accounting, we had a program, it was called the STAR program. And that's where an individual would train the staff on what they did. And they was mandatory that they attended the training because they got awards for training and certificate and everything. They actually went and learned completely what accounts receivable was, what contract was, what payroll was. You had to learn every aspect of accounting. So that's something that can be done in-house. And then you bring in someone like from HUD that would explain to them the regulations of CDBG, the regulations of home.
Right.
But they need to understand the in-house impact they do when they do a contract, when they do a payment.
Right.
And what goes through from the time they do a payment, how it goes through the whole process of actually the output of that check.
Okay.
So that's,
We were there at different times, but every month, I know when I was over there, every month during the monthly staff meeting, somebody was assigned that they were gonna give a, 20, 30-minute presentation on, some functional aspect of their job, and every month they did.
Okay. Great. Next slide, please.
and the thing about it, it wasn't so much that you sat in, you were tested at the end. So you couldn't sit there and do the dollar, pay attention to the presentation. When you finished at the end of that presentation, you actually received the test.
Okay.
What you were supposed to.
Learning objectives and goals, yeah, and tests. Good. So, establishing the financial management, a more robust financial management system where you review your current system. Now, some of the technology might do this for you, but identify any reporting gaps. How do you integrate between IDIS, the city's famous system, and the internal what you call a cursor control.
CDM, yeah. It actually, they're writing the interface for IDIS right now.
Oh, they have an IDIS interface?
They haven't launched it yet, but they're writing it.
Okay, that would be excellent. But in the meantime, you have to devise ways to do
Yeah,
that internally.
either way, I mean, we wouldn't have them customize it to interface with Bonus because that would be so too expensive,
Right.
but we'll still have to do some
Right, so you have to do
interest
some
and
translation.
reconciliations, right?
Right, okay. Monitor the transactions monthly for spending levels to meet regulatory requirements. No more 1.5 issues.
We don't have a 1.5 issue, where did you get that from?
Unless we get a 1.5% pay.
Well, I'm talking about across the board. I mean, a lot of communities have 1.5 issues. A lot of people have commitment deadline issues, spending deadline issues, et cetera, right? So plan for those right up front. So you'll never see them again. Next slide. Last but not least, and actually first, is to develop a change management and communications plan. Changing the organization where you're changing structure, you're changing systems, you're learning new things, can do a couple of things in an organization. You can either energize the organization or you can de-energize the organization by the way that those things are rolled out. Because people will gravitate towards learning, developing themselves, understanding something positive is coming and that they have a role in it. That's where your strategy and framework to engage the stakeholders both internally and externally are concerned. Because your external stakeholders are going to need to know that the organization is now structured differently. There may be some different procedures that take place. Now they're going to be dealing with the red team. They might not need to know that, but they need to have a point of contact, right, on the red team, except, then you'll have to determine what those are. So you're going to need to a change management and communications plan. I put a lot of information in here on communications planning and how that works and what to look for in behavior of people as you go through that process. Okay. So I think that's the last slide. Right? Okay. Barriers. Let's do this way. I'm going to give you have 6 recommendations. Okay, so I would like 2 people to work together, and I'd like you to list the barriers for the recommendation that I'm going to give you. You're going to only work on one recommendation, and then we'll report that out, and we'll look at leverages or how to overcome those barriers really quickly, all right? So, if you'll go back there. Okay. Terrence and Daryl, if you'll work on design and implement hybrid organization structure, just looking at the barriers there, just brainstorming together. And Deidre and Laura, develop a standard technology platform. Oh, that just landed great, didn't it?
That's not fair.
What page are they on?
The recommendation, you're looking at recommendation 1, I think it's on page 35. Recommendation 2 is on page 41. If you'll do develop and implement performance management system, do you want to work together? Okay. And the creed. Let me see. Cree and Renee, why don't you work on develop an institute training program, and Elaine and Carol?
Sure.
Okay. Establishment of the system,
What, which one?
recommendation 5. Establish, and we're looking at barriers right now. Okay. and then we're gonna report those out. That's on page 41, I believe.
Which one we got, I'm sorry?
You got
Oh.
training, institute a training program for staff and management, which is recommendation 4. I think that's on page 41. Wow, these are 41. Okay, and 6 we'll discuss together. So take about 15 minutes or less. Brainstorm. Don't try and evaluate it. Just throw it out there and get it on the paper. Okay?
I'm sorry, how many minutes?
15 minutes. Okay.
I'm trying to understand. So we're, on
Yes.
this, we're to do what, the barriers of this
The barriers of
to convert to hybrid
to
organization?
convert to a hybrid organization. What are the barriers in this organization to moving from where you are now to that structure?
Okay, I got you.
Okay?